initials. That's why that plate is there. And as Lou said, my hobby is collecting Rhode Island license plates, but not only collecting the plates, trying to document as much as I can about their history. And I'm so glad to be here tonight and to speak to folks that have an interest in local history, because I have an interest in local history as well, but it's the history of the entire state and it's motor vehicle history. But it's nice to see there's a few volunteer fire permits above the door there. Those are from the 1940s and 1950s. There's a few old driver's licenses and other certificates in this case. So it's great to see that other people are preserving this kind of stuff. I wish I had such a nice place to preserve, to display my collection. But as Lou said, I specialize in Rhode Island plates, but I also I also concentrate on Washington, D.C. I'll try to answer a few of the questions I get first that I often get. How many license plates do you have? I don't know exactly, but does anybody want to guess, like roughly? In my world, in the world of license plate collectors, it's a pretty small collection. It's pretty tight. I don't have a lot of stuff just laying around. I don't collect for quantity. I collect for the specific goals that I have. I have a few other areas of concentration, but Rhode Island is my main focus. And I have about 15,000 license plates. To me, that's not very many. It's a relatively small question, but it's clearly more than I need. But I've been doing this for about 41 years or so. I don't know exactly when I started. I think around 1972. I've been a member of the Automobile License Plate Collectors Association for 30-some years. It's a worldwide organization of people that are interested in license plates or in their history. It's a good organization. If you're interested in the hobby, I'll be happy to hook you up with that. I'm going to talk a little bit about Rhode Island license plate history tonight, which I did when I was last here, but I brought all different plates and got some new things since then. A number of interesting things have happened in Rhode Island plate history since then, one of them being that we passed the 100-year mark. I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, of registrations in the state. But I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have as I go along. And so let's get started. Who has a good sense of when license plates were created? When did license plates come to be needed? Let me give you a quick little history on motor vehicle history. I'm also interested in automobile history, and it stems from the license plate hobby. And a lot of people don't have a really good sense of when cars came to be and when license plates were first called for. So very briefly, when we talk about the earliest cars, and of course it's nothing like cars today. There was no asphalt back then, there was no gas stations back then, tires were poor quality, cars didn't have starters, it was starting cranks, completely different than today. You can't take anything that you know about cars today and translate it to the early years. But the earliest cars, we call them horseless carriages today because they were essentially carriages that were drawn by horses with the horses removed and an engine put inside. If you think about maybe a small cart that you might see on a farm with a little lawnmower engine, maybe like a little riding mower, cars were very, very primitive. Didn't go fast, couldn't go far. So when you look at the license plates, you can't think at all that they were used like they were used today. But the first self-propelled car in this country, the Duryea brothers in Springfield, Mass., invented the first practical, by standards of the day, internal combustion engine to move a vehicle under its own power. That was in 1893. The first company set up for commercial production of horseless carriages and motor vehicles in this country, that occurred in 1897. And early registrations were not confined to the states. And in fact, in most cases, the earliest registrations in this country were called for by municipal governments, city governments. St. Louis, Missouri was one of the earliest jurisdictions to issue license plates and registrations. Cleveland, Ohio, Philadelphia. There were a few other municipalities that issued registrations relatively early. I haven't done a lot of research into that, but clearly the first state to require registration was New York, and that occurred in 1901. So in 1897, we've got the first production of motor vehicles by a company. Very low numbers, not used for general transportation at all, but that's when the first state required that people register their cars. And there were no license plates. They would issue a registration certificate, and you had to display your initials on your car. This is in New York. Shortly thereafter, that became a little bit too cumbersome with the initials, so they started having people put on their license plates that they had to make themselves or buy the number that was on the registration certificate that they were assigned. New York, in fact, didn't give out uniform license plates until 1910. Relatively late compared to the other states. The first state to require that vehicles be registered and to give out uniform license plates was Massachusetts. And that occurred in 1903. Connecticut also started to require registration in 1903, but like New York, required motorists to make their own plates or provide their own plates. And there was you could go to pass for an auto parts store back then and get a plate made. They would have kits where you could put the numbers on that you needed. A lot of people would go to the local blacksmith or whoever would do leather work in the town, and they'd have a leather pad made up with house numbers on it. And that's what most we call those pre-state plates, plates that were required but were provided by the owner. Most pre-state plates are leather pads with metal numbers. Now, Connecticut is the only New England state that required plates like that. All the other New England states started registration relatively early, and the states provided uniform license plates. And Rhode Island was the second state to require registration and to provide uniform license plates, and that was in 1904, right around the middle of 1904. So.